All right, everyone, welcome back to Beneath the Helmet. This is season 4. This is episode 102. Today, I got a chance to sit down with a retired battalion chief, also a psilocybin facilitator, and a psychedelic advocate and public speaker. I'm your host, Arjuna George, former fire chief turned podcaster, author, and coach to the fire service. So today, I got a chance to sit down with retired battalion chief Matt Thierfelder. So, welcome to the show, Matt.
It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
Hey, glad to be here. Good to see you again. I know we had one little talk, but I'm excited to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So I'll tell our listener a little bit about who Matt is and kind of what brought you, into the fire service, a 30-year plus career. And then we're going to venture into, leaving the fire service and some of the things you're doing now. So share with the listeners a little bit about who Matt is.
Grew up in Vancouver, Washington, Canada. If I don't say that, everybody thinks Canada. Another Vancouver, just slightly down south. But didn't grow up wanting to be a firefighter. My mom was a dental hygienist and worked next door to a fire station and had a few patients that were firefighters and thought it might be good for me. And as a teenager, about 6 months after graduating, I didn't really have any direction, wasn't doing anything. And without having ever met a firefighter or been in a fire station or done a ride along, I moved to Tacoma to go to Bates. It's a vocational program, the big fire service training, and it just caught the bug. And right out of high school, did that, couldn't get a job. There was thousands of people applying for every job in the early 90s. It was really hard. It was like being on the rodeo circuit, traveling around, getting thank you for applying letters when you get a 98 or 99. And but ended up finishing that program, getting my EMT cert from Tacoma, and got a job shagging grocery carts at the local grocery store. Went to Portland Community College, got my fire science degree, and ended up driving an ambulance for North Country EMS in Yakult. They service kind of all around Mount St. Helens. That's where I ran my first calls. About a 3-hour round trip if you transported somebody, and way out in the boonies. It was really fun. First volunteer fire department I worked for, and then ended up getting a job as a volunteer and a job with Fire District 5, which would end up consolidating with Vancouver. I worked in the maintenance shop there on the rigs for a while before I got hired and managed a little address sign program, and still couldn't get hired. So I ended up getting into paramedic school, and I think it was 1992, and then got a job offer from the Vancouver Fire Department. And promptly dropped out of paramedic school because I couldn't do both, and worked there for 30 years. Spent about 10 years as a firefighter. Got promoted to captain, did 1 year in training, and realized that I could not handle being on days. I was supposed to do 2 years, and I made it a year and said, I want to go back on the line. And I was a captain for about 17, 18 years, and ended up being a station captain. Lived and worked in the same neighborhood. If I walk out my door in the wintertime and go down 3 houses, I could see the last station I worked at. So it was a total immersion. And I loved the city and loved the place I worked. And it's a great department, about 200 people, all the normal specialties, tech rescue, hazmat. And it kind of developed over my career. I never really got any of the specialties. I think my specialty was just running calls and working at a busy station, but I did enjoy, kind of the development of our truck companies in the early days. And we were lucky enough to, when we finally got truck companies, we had tillered aerials. If you had a fire in our department and you were on the truck, you were going to be there. We could do one alarm without mutual aid. It was a great career. And then did my last 2 years as a battalion chief.
What were some of the best parts of that 30 years? Is there some highlights in there of what you maybe accomplished or saw in the fire service or just experienced and felt as a
In
person?
my mind, it's all about who I was working with and where. I mean, there was times in downtown Vancouver in the early 80s, there was not a lot going on. So there was a lot of development in that. at one point they were taking out a swath of houses. So we were burning. That's when Celebrity was doing a lot of training burns, and we burnt a lot of houses, like whole blocks worth of houses, and people would come. I was even in a movie called Bongwater. I showed up to work one day, and they had a whole movie set up, and they said, "You're going to go down here and be a part of this movie." It was with Jack Black and Luke Wilson and Andy Dick. And the chief at the time let us do whatever we wanted. Today would be impossible with the law department. You have to pre-prove everything you can't really do. But we just kind of had the run of the city, and every fire alarm was a full-blown drill. Everybody was just really into training and developing. Because prior to the consolidation with the two departments, it wasn't very strong. And the chief kind of came in and said, we're going to quit doing a lot of things, and we're going to train and run calls. And if you're sure what to do and you're not on a call, train. And it was like, I could get behind that. And we're busy. It was fun. So probably those early 90s, being downtown on the truck, it was kind of everything down there. And then like every moment in my career was the best. The last thing I did was always the most fun. But a couple of the stations I worked at with, like, always working with like a couple of my best friends, and it just almost felt like stealing, like the good old days were every day.
Beautiful. Love to hear that. Love to hear that. If you were, say, 20, 21, 25, would you join the fire service again?
Man, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot different now. I look at how hard it is for people. Well, it seems easy to get hired because there's a lot of jobs and not a lot of people applying, but the hours and all the hoops you have to jump through, and I don't know. It was great. I'm glad I did it. I would do it all over again, but if I had a son that was 21, I don't know. If it's your passion and you love it, it takes a bite out of you. The sleep deprivation and the hypervigilance and the things you see and all the birthdays and holidays you miss. It takes a lot of time. It steals a lot of time from, family. You're selling a giant chunk of your life to be in the fire service. I felt like I'd won the lottery. I wouldn't have done anything else. You could tell I was a firefighter because I was wearing a firefighter shirt, firefighter hat, and it was the best thing ever. I felt more money and time off. I traveled the world. It was amazing. I don't know.
No, I appreciate that because, I'm in the same boat. I think I would, but I also told, I just did an interview with my family for episode 100 and got a chance to interview my family about the experience of growing up as a firefighter kid. So it's a cool episode. But yeah, one of those things was I asked my kids if they'd want to be in the fire service at any one point in their lives, and they're almost 30, both of them now. And they didn't. And I said in the podcast, I'm kind of thankful that you didn't, because it's like, just because I did doesn't mean you have to do it. You're experiencing your own life. You're finding your own way. You don't necessarily need to just follow in dad's footsteps, right? Very cool. So share with the listener a little bit about the last, number of years and kind of what brought you to saying enough's enough, time to hang the helmet and move out of the fire service. Was there events that led up to that feeling within your gut?
It had always there had always been a thing, in my retirement system. The minimum retirement age is 53. And, I was there and I had done all the things in the fire department that I wanted to do. There wasn't anything that I wanted to do. There wasn't a call that I hadn't run or an apparatus or a specialty. There was nothing. I had done all the things that I wanted to do. I felt pretty complete, but I just, I hit my birthday at 53 and everybody's kind of looking around, and like every room that you walked in is like, when are you going to retire? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm trying to keep my cards close. And it was literally every conversation, especially with the older guys who kind of share notes, but I didn't know how to retire. And I kind of felt like I was quitting or giving up or saying I couldn't do it anymore or take it, but none of that was actually happening. I was just retiring. There's a beginning and end ending, but it did not feel like that. And I was like, what the hell, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do now? I've been so driven and so focused to do all this stuff. And now I was making more money than I'd ever made. And I'm just going to stop and do what at 53? And it's like, kind of had an existential crisis. And, I had really struggled with mental health over the years, probably were longer and more severe than I would like to admit, and I would have did everything I could, look around, and everybody else seems to be doing just fine. Maybe I'm just the only one that's feeling this way. It wasn't just work, it was everything. And for me, I think a lot of it was I was tired. I was burned. I didn't want to spend the night at the station anymore. And the transition from work to home and like being up all night. As a BC, I slept a lot. Didn't get up as much, but prior to that, for 10 or 15 years, every shift was, several calls after midnight, one night at shift change, and I just wasn't sleeping anymore. And I was drinking a lot just to calm myself down. I found myself super hyper vigilant, and I was just not happy at all. Kind of right about the time I got promoted to Battalion Chief, I was like, what is the point of all this if I'm working so hard to have this retirement and set myself up? Like, I don't want to go fishing anymore. I don't want to hunt anymore. I don't really want to do anything. I wanted to go home and be left alone and be by myself until I went back to work. And that was like the only thing that I was doing. And it felt good to be at work, and the calls were kind of exciting, but the moments that I felt good from a fire got less and less and less and less. And I was like, what is the point of all this? And so I'd done talk therapy. I'd done different medications, SSRIs and, Adderall because had ADHD or was tired, and Xanax because I couldn't sleep. I was on all these conflicting meds, and none of them seemed to help. They all kind of masked things. And I became fascinated with psychedelics. I'd always been a big mushroom forager in the woods. And in 2006, John Hopkins put out a study about it was end of life and how they were using psilocybin to treat end of life anxiety. And the gist of it that I couldn't get out of my head was this was like the most important, impactful experience of these people's lives. When they look back years later, if they hadn't passed away, it was like the most important, impactful thing in their life. Right up there with birth of a child, marriage. And so I had been following the science and the studies and been curious about psychedelics for a really long time. And a couple of years prior to retirement, Oregon had passed Measure 109, which kind of the first place in the world, the first place in the country to legalize psilocybin-assisted therapy in a legal service center. And I had been kind of trying to figure out, what I'm going to do after retirement. I wasn't even sure what turned me on or what I enjoyed anymore, but I always really kind of enjoyed foraging for wild mushrooms, and psychedelics were really interesting. And there's an opportunity in this program to be a psilocybin facilitator. Probably had to be a nurse or a doctor or a therapist, but come to find out the bar was really low to do that and to take the training. And so in an effort to find purpose in my life and be able to help others, I went through this program. It's kind of lead a double life. Had just recently got promoted to Battalion Chief, and it was like one intensive a month for, I think, 6 months, and some online classes. And I found myself in a community of people outside the fire service. Didn't realize I didn't have any friends outside the fire service, but I had this whole new group of friends that was really supportive and really into mental health, really doing good things and helping people in this sense of community that I'd never had. There was a lot more understanding. The fire service isn't very warm, fuzzy, forgiving. So I just really leaned into that. Learned a lot about myself. And part of that program was doing psilocybin as part of the practicum in Oregon. It was right after the service centers opened, and it was a pretty profound experience. It was a lot like what I had anticipated or read about, or, like Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, and some of the documentaries are out there. It was a profound experience. And it wasn't just taking psilocybin mushrooms that somebody gave you. It was all the buildup and the intention setting and the therapy before and group talk during and after. And none of it made sense until I got to experience it all together. And it made some huge mind shifts and impacts for me. I got into real negative mindset, and I was pretty sure about how the world was and how I interacted and what people thought of me. And I was not right about most of it. I had just got in this mindset loop, and kind of really helped me break out of that. And I kept going to psychedelics conferences, the big MAPS conference in Denver. I've been to a couple times, and the horizons gone. I kept meeting people and networking and looking for other firefighters that were into this. And surprisingly, there weren't many battalion chiefs out there interested in psychedelic-assisted therapy. But I just kept, kind of looking for the other people. And I went to a retreat in Mexico City. Never thought I'd go to Mexico City, but I found myself in Mexico City at this teaching learning retreat for psilocybin facilitation, and met a guy that I'd end up meeting later that ended up testifying in Washington State to bring, this is right after I retired, psilocybin-assisted therapy to Washington. The bill didn't pass. I think today they just pre-introduced another bill, and in that process, I met a therapist, a naturopath that worked with ketamine. And I remember talking to her saying, I can't remember any good outcomes about ketamine. I don't know who does ketamine. And seen all of the billboards for it, but I didn't know who did it or why anybody would do it. We carried on the regs and we give it to trauma patients. But after talking to her more and more and talking to some people that had done it, how helpful it had been, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll go do some ketamine-assisted therapy, the IV treatment. It's 6 sessions over 2 weeks. Maybe I have that wrong. It was 6 sessions over a couple of weeks. And I had to take a month off. This is kind of right after I had turned 53. And that was the first time that I had actually kind of slowed down and calmed down with doing that therapy. And it really helped me. Everything was going to be okay. It's a really good go-to for people that are in kind of mental health crisis, but it's really good for people that are also just kind of struggling day to day, which I was. I hadn't slept in probably 15 years, more than an hour or two a night. And I took that month off and came back to work. Didn't tell anybody what I was doing. It was like, because I was kind of ashamed of what people would think. I didn't want them to know, even though it's legal. And my first shift back after being gone a month, I'm past the retirement age, and I've got all these performance appraisals I need to do. I'd been assigned this task of reconciling all these incomplete reports. It was a nightmare. I didn't know how to do it. I'd tried, and every time I did, just the mess got bigger. And all this stuff I'm going to do. And it was the day of the election. I get a call first thing in the morning, says, well, can you come down to the main station? We're going to go over the incident action plan for possible civil unrest for the presidential election. And I remember sitting in the office and we're talking over what we're going to do if there's a fire at the courthouse, and we're going to use different terms. And I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. And I'm thinking to myself, we're going to do what we always do at a fire. And it was like a lightning bolt hit me in the head. And I'd heard people talk about it. It's like, yes, it's time for me to retire. It's time. And it was just like a night and day difference. It was like before this moment and after, and it's time for me to retire. And I think ketamine really helped me just be in a different mindset to get there.
Did you ever second guess your final decision, or was that like, that was final? Like there was no.
Absolutely. I second guessed it, but I was committed. It was just hard to do. It was hard to walk away from all that stuff. And I was going to miss everybody, and I was going to miss the guys. The only thing I could do is kind of just like look at everything from, October to New Year's Eve, which was my last shift, was like this kind of a victory lap. And I tried to visit the stations as much as I could and talk to them. I wish I could have given everybody a zip drive of all the things that I'd known and done and seen, but you can't. And like, as soon as I left, all the stuff I knew about that building, or all the stuff I knew, fires with ceiling heat, all that stuff is just gone. So I tried to just go around the stations and talk with guys as much as I could about anything that they wanted to talk about. And I'd really tried to be like the best leader I could at the end. I didn't try to change who I was when I became a battalion chief and a leader, but I really did try to stop talking shit about people, because it's such a cancer in the fire service. And we should take care of each other, not be competing so much. And but it was hard to leave.
So leaving the fire family is definitely probably one of the biggest challenges of retiring from the fire service, the people, honestly. And that's what I hear over and over again. I hear that from you as well. What surprised you about leaving the fire service that was actually easy? Was there anything that was like, oh, I thought that was going to be hard, but this was actually really easy to leave the fire service?
Man, I said the hardest part was the last shift. We did the tap out, and somebody's got to film it so my wife can see it. And that was hard. And it was hard not coming back by the station. I know a lot of guys, I'll never come by the station, and I don't want to see any of those people ever again, but I love stopping by or being invited for dinner and hanging out. And I did. Sometimes I felt like I wanted to go more than I should, but I still am an active dues paying union member. I still go to the union meetings. I'm going to the Ledge conference next month in Olympia. You know, my wife's been super supportive. She started a nonprofit, Fire Family Foundation, and to kind of get the spouses involved. We're going to be going to the state Ledge conference and the educational seminar. So like I'm still around. I still get to see the people, and I still get that buzz from talking to them about what's going on, but I don't miss getting up in the middle of the night. I don't miss spending the night at the fire station at all. At all.
Yep. Here you go. So we're going to explore psilocybins and the whole psychedelic realm for sure. But I also know that you worked on EMDR as one of the modalities as well. Want to share a little bit about your experience with that before we dive into the psilocybin world?
Sure. EMDR was something I'd tried before, and kind of with talk therapy with me. I never really got to what was bothering me, but when I did ketamine, it was kind of a new protocol that I'd heard about from a friend. His wife worked at a ketamine clinic, and she said there was this therapist, and she's working with firefighters that are doing ketamine, and then she's doing EMDR the day after every session, because your mind is kind of in this, they call it neuroplasticity, kind of susceptible to new things. You can think about things in a different way, reorganize them, which is kind of what EMDR does. I think today it works better than it did in the past, because I think I'm able to be more open and more vulnerable, and I'm not really worried what the therapist thinks, or I'm not thinking about what I should say or what I shouldn't say. I'm just able to actually be open and honest. Before, it wasn't working for me.
Beautiful.
So I do think EMDR is helpful if you can, be vulnerable enough to talk about the things and bring up the things that you want to work with. If you know what you need to work with. I mean, I think a lot of people don't really know what the problem is. I didn't. I was just angry. I was tired. I was frustrated. I didn't know what my problem was.
Very interested and curious why psychedelics, why psilocybin? Is there something that, you talked about it in the past, you're a forger, but what really drew you to this as like, this is what my body, my mind, my spirit needs versus other modalities out there? Anything that you can share?
The fact that some of the leading institutions in the United States are fascinated by this, and they have been for a long time. If they hadn't been put into Schedule 1 in the 60s, 70s, there would probably be a lot more research. And if you look into the history and what they were treating with it, and then if you look at the history of psychedelics and psilocybin use in Canada around alcohol use disorder, tons of scientific studies, hundreds and hundreds of scientific studies, and still to this day, and millions of dollars are being invested in this because of the promise. This is a naturally occurring compound that's actually pretty easy to grow in your own house. And you can take it a couple times and you're not on a medication for life. And it works really, really good for a lot of people, for a number of different things, for anxiety, depression, OCD. I mean, and the list just goes on. I don't think they know how many things, off-label uses, so to speak, for different things it's going to use. I was just fascinated by the science and the interest in pop culture. I mean, if you look at the spike in interest in psychedelics after Michael Pollan wrote the book, How to Change Your Mind, it's huge. There was a definite spike in interest and it's because SSRIs and antidepressants and talk therapy and the field of mental health and psychiatry hasn't had anything new for a long time. And the medications don't work that well. They work for about half the people or less. And I just got really fascinated with it. And it was something so big to sink my teeth into. It's like, I think I could be interested in this for the rest of my life. And this would be like my thing in retirement. I didn't really know that initially. I'm probably more confident about that now than I ever have.
What an important thing to do in retirement is to find a new passion, right? Something to work towards, something to get up every morning for, right? So
Yeah, and then it's amazing to, I've been a part of helping to facilitate some firefighter retreats and to see, and doing group work, firefighters together. Western medicine, you do everything by yourself. Psilocybin-assisted therapy in a group is amazing, and to watch the difference in somebody coming in day one versus leaving, 3 or 5 days later is just amazing. They leave with like, some hope and rejuvenation, and gives them something to go back and work with the therapist. It's not a magic pill. You're not going to take this thing, I'll rewire your brain. You're not going to be fixed, but it gives you something tangible that you've learned for yourself. Nobody talked you into thinking about this, but in that altered state, you kind of come to these realizations for yourself, and you're able to take that back. And it's all about the integration afterwards. Like the experience that you had that day, a week later, it's going to be different than when you thought of it that day. And a month later and 6 months later, it'll keep unfolding. Kind of like when you have a back injury, when you do those exercises every day, your back's going to get better. Well, after the experience, when you work with the therapist, you try to integrate these things into your life permanently. That's where the real magic comes from. The magic really isn't happen the day when you take the medicine and have that altered state. It's what you do with what you figured out afterwards.
I like that. I like that. So for the listener who's kind of, maybe this is the first exposure to this discussion, what is the difference between psilocybin and psychedelics? Can you give us a quick little,
Well,
are they the same thing or totally different?
Psilocybin is a classic psychedelic. LSD would be a classic psychedelic. Ketamine would not be. It's an anesthesia, but it has off-label use that works really well for mental health. And so the term psychedelic covers a broad band of things, but LSD and psilocybin. But psilocybin is a classic psychedelic.
Yeah, psilocybin is just mushrooms, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So let's walk through what's a typical psilocybin experience. Not necessarily the experience that I'm sure everyone's experience is a little different, but the process of going through that, getting that treatment done on yourself. Walk us through what that looks like. Is that you go see a doctor, or you do this on your own, or how does that work?
So I'll speak specifically to what's happening in Oregon. So if you wanted to go to a retreat in Oregon, you would contact them, fill out a form, and they would contact you, and then they would kind of run you through a quick little intake to make sure you didn't have any contraindications or red flags. If you weren't currently manic or currently having suicidal ideations, or you didn't have any red flag drug interactions. Sometimes if you're on certain medications or SSRIs, the psilocybin will still work, but you'd have to take a really high dose. So a lot of times they'll want you to work with your doctor if you're on certain medications to kind of taper off. And that's totally between you and your doctor and the medical person's doing intake for the service center. But let's say you're not on any medications, you don't have any past medical history of bipolar or schizophrenic, which are kind of the red flags, and you're over 21 and you want to do this for personal growth or optimization, or say you're not sure what's wrong, you've got a lot of anxiety and depression and hypervigilance because you've been a firefighter for 30 years and you think you can live better. You go in and talk with a facilitator and set your intentions. Like, why do you want to come and do psilocybin? You'll talk about what the things are that you want to work on, and maybe 1 or 2 sessions like that. And then you'll show up at a service center, and if you're doing group work, there might be 6 people or 10 people there, or it might be a one-on-one, and they'll give you the mushrooms and you'll take them, and usually with an eye mask and music on headphones to keep you focused on not things external, but internal. And it usually lasts around 6 hours, and it's dose dependent, but a large dose, usually about 6 hours. And then afterwards, kind of talk about the experience, what you thought, what you saw, what you're feeling. And it's not directive. Nobody's talking to you and doing therapy. If you're a therapist, you can't do therapy while somebody's in an altered state. So you're pretty much they're making sure that you're safe in that space. And afterwards, there'll be a couple follow-up integration sessions. And what comes up for people is different. You could say that you wanted to work on this certain thing psilocybin has a way of kind of bringing up what's in the subconscious. This sounds kind of spiritual woo-woo, but, I think it's an intelligent medicine. It kind of brings up what you need to work on. People are always worried about having a bad trip, and I think I don't like that term. I think I would rather say challenging experience. And when you have a challenging experience, I think that's where you have the most opportunity for growth. If you go to a structure fire and everything goes really well, you don't learn anything.
Yeah.
But if you go to a structure fire and it's a complete shit show, you'll have a lot of PIAs and you'll study that and go over it. You learn a lot. And so when somebody has a really difficult, challenging experience, maybe that's what they needed. I've seen this happen a couple of times where it allowed them to bring up and acknowledge something in their past or in their childhood that they'd never dealt with. And so now they have a starting point for where they can start to finally deal with this, whatever it is, where they hadn't even realized what the problem was before or hadn't really addressed it. So that's kind of the flow of the psilocybin experience.
If somebody is having a challenging experience, is there ways to get out of that challenging experience in the moment, or for that 6 hours, are they experiencing that challenging moment?
In all of the experiences that I've had in group settings, nobody's ever like said, like, I need to get out of here. Call 911. I've lost my mind, and pop culture has done a real disservice to psychedelics as a whole. If you're having a challenging experience, there's going to be somebody right there, raise your hand. Somebody's going to be right there or sitting next to you. They're going to tell you, everything's going to be okay. You took a medicine. It's working. Breathe. You're feeling these intense experiences. Well, lean into that. Lean into what you're feeling, that's why you're here. That's why you're doing it. I get a lot out of being there and witnessing these, brave people go through this and to know how beneficial it's going to be for them on the other side. And a lot of people build up this huge amount of tension and anticipation, and it works in their mind for, depending on how long they've been waiting to do this, for months. Like, what's going to happen? What am I going to see? And so this didn't really make sense to me until I experienced it, but they say the medicine starts working before you take it because you're spending a lot of time and you think about why you want to do it and what you want to get out. And so yeah, it's so much more than just the day taking psilocybin. The before and the after, it's the whole thing.
Very cool. So in particular, the retreats that you're familiar with, are these like in clinics or more like a rural setting like you would see in a retreat where you're out in the woods or something like that? What's the thing like?
A lot of people say, oh, it's got to be in nature, it's got to be outside, or people have real rigid thoughts about what it should. In Oregon, you take psilocybin indoors in a service center. Colorado's a little bit different, and I don't understand the laws there, but there's a little bit difference, but if you go to Jamaica or Mexico where it's tolerated or legal, they can be outside. But in Oregon, it's inside of a service center, and the mushrooms are grown in a lab, they're tested in a lab, and they're secured in the service center. And so you know exactly what you're getting, and that's the model that Oregon has. Is it perfect? No, but it's a start, and it's one of the best things going in the United States right now for access that anybody over 21 can do.
When you know that the product's safe, the environment's safe, you got trained facilitators, that brings down that anxiety level of doing this for the first time too, right?
Yeah, and it can be very, there's a lot of unknown and there's a lot of anxiety coming into it of, everything that you've heard in the past, especially depending on where you grew up, in the war on drugs, it's going to make you crazy. You'll never, there's so much propaganda and so much stigma around it. Yeah. The kind of the mantra of doing psychedelics is, set and setting is like where you're at, who you're with, and if you're safe, and that's super important. And it also allows you to be relaxed, to be able to breathe in those difficult experiences and figure out what you need to figure out for yourself. Where you're at and who you're with is really important.
Do you personally see psilocybin being like cannabis is now in the near future, or is that a dream, as in accessibility and legal and all that?
I'm not sure that I would want psilocybin to be available at every corner, Minute Mart.
Yeah.
I think it's a really strong, powerful medicine. I think there's a lot of inequity in who can access it, though. It's
Right.
it's very expensive to go to a service center, and people that don't have a lot of money or don't have access to that. There are psychedelic societies and communities, and the underground world of psychedelics has been around for a really long time. But if you're a firefighter, you're not in that world. You kind of have trouble accessing it. But I don't necessarily think it needs to be legalized and available next to weed. Yeah, pretty strong, powerful medicine. But then again, to argue with myself, microdosing psilocybin in small doses is pretty accessible, and risk profile for that is really low. It's a really difficult question, and that's something that a lot of states and regions and countries are trying to sort out. It's not for everybody. You need to be in a safe place and be thoughtful about when you do it in large doses, because you could end up in a pretty unsafe, compromised situation if you're not careful.
For sure. 100%. So you talked about the price point. Is this like 5,000 less, 5,000 more, 10,000? Are we looking at 20,000? Where just a ballpark of where somebody would look for a one treatment?
To do so, the difference between group work and individual work is a huge price point difference. And I think to do group work where you do it as a group, which I think is definitely the best way to do it, you get so much more out of it. And you learn from what everybody else is going through, and you get to see everybody else. It'd be between $500 and $1,500 to do a group.
Yeah.
And for individual, probably the low end, $2,000, $2,500 up to, $7,000 or $8,000, depending on where you go.
Yeah, not chump change, but also it's not totally out of reach, right? So.
No, and there are several places that are offering, scholarships for vets and firefighters, and there's even a company out there that I've worked with a little bit that provides insurance coverage for psychedelics, ketamine, and stellate ganglion block, hemtia. And I think that's really probably the missing link is insurance coverage. But if this is something that you believe in and other things haven't worked for you, don't wait for workers' comp or insurance. Sell one of your motorcycles or one of your jet skis or one of your snowmobiles. And if this is kind of the thing that's, that you want to do that might be life-changing and help save your mental health and your family, you can afford it, step down. A lot of people spend a lot of money on things to make them happy. That RV sitting in the driveway that you never use, it's not that expensive.
Yeah. Invest in yourself.
Don't get cheap when you're shopping around for it either.
Yeah. So before we dive into things like ketamine and other medicines, describe to the listener a little bit about the difference of microdosing and maybe a full dose at a retreat, like you were talking before. The benefits, the power of it, and maybe why somebody would choose one or the other.
So microdosing is by nature supposed to be subperceptible, or anything less than a quarter of a gram. And there has been some studies, not as many studies on microdosing as on macrodosing. And so the jury's kind of out, but people that believe in microdosing really strongly believe in it. And it's something that you could take. There's a couple different schools of thought, but not every day, maybe 3 days on, 1 day off, or 5 days on, 2 days off, depending on what school you want to follow. And people get a lot of benefits out of microdosing. They're subtle, and some people could say, well, I'm not feeling anything, or I can't quantify what it is. And then other people say it's life-changing. I've never felt this good. So it's very subjective, person to person. And there's some great books out there. Fadiman's got a new book out. He's kind of the godfather of microdosing that just came out that's really good, that explains it really well. But it's pretty low-hanging fruit. There's not a lot of things that it's not going to be harmful. It might be really good for you. I remember in school, and one of my instructors was saying, like, for the big life-changing aha moments, anything kind of less than a gram, maybe like a worthless dose. People will probably hate that I just said that, but and I kind of find that to be true. I microdose occasionally, not all the time, but sometimes, and I definitely sense a mood difference. I feel a lot more social. I feel, a lot more relaxed and more creative. It's almost like I had a couple beers, but in a healthy feel.
Cool.
But it's very subjective, person to person.
Yeah.
And then the macro dose is just completely different. And, anywhere between, 3 and 5 grams is a pretty big dose. Did that kind of answer that question?
For sure. Yeah, totally. I think mostly for the listener, just, to get the full story of the use of this medicine.
I think a lot of people start with microdosing, especially if they're anxious about it, because then you get to build a relationship with it. You get to try it. You get to maybe get a little tiny taste of what it feels like, and that kind of lowers the anxiety. And for some people, what they wanted to get out of microdosing, it gets them there, and they're completely happy, and they don't want to do anymore. And that's great. I encourage people to try microdose.
Yeah.
If you've done it and you've felt good and you think that you might want to, you've done some research and you've listened to some stories about, people say 5 grams, a heroic dosage. You want to see what that's like. You want to see what that is. You want to know what's there for you. I think that's amazing. I think that's the best benefit from psilocybin is that those higher doses.
Beautiful. Okay, well, let's dive into a couple more of the alternative treatments that you've personally either experienced, done yourself, or are familiar with. So let's start off with ketamine. Just a little backstory of what it is and how it could, really change first responders in particular, their lives.
Ketamine goes way back to, they wanted a new anesthesia. They had this whole list of things that they wanted an anesthesia to be, and ketamine is just perfect. And it was used a lot in Vietnam. We use it. It's used today in operating rooms, and we carried it on the rigs to kind of sedate or be able to treat people that have really significant traumas because it's a dissociative. I had my first experience with ketamine was at a fire. I had a ceiling come down on me, and I was in the back of the ambulance, and I was mad. I could see it coming, and it still happened. I thought I got out of the way, but it rang my bell pretty good. I'm in the back of the ambulance, and they asked if I was in pain, and I said no, and they gave me some fentanyl, and then they asked if I wanted ketamine, and I kind of started laughing. The fentanyl was kicking in, and I had a really intense near-death experience that kind of, if I look back, was the catalyst to getting into psychedelics. And what ketamine does is a dissociative, and it's used a lot for somebody that's really maybe having current suicidal ideations. They found that it's probably the best thing to get somebody in to do IV ketamine if they're having suicidal ideations within a couple hours afterwards. They're not. It just kind of has a way of letting you look at life differently. It's really hard to describe what you'd see in an altered state, but it has a really good way of calming the mind and the brain down and letting you look at things differently. We get in such rigid patterns of, I get this stimulus and I think that it's like a one-way track. It's just a rut that you get stuck in. And with ketamine, doing the IV therapy, lets you think about things in a completely different way. And it was probably the most relaxed and pain-free I've ever been in my entire life. And probably 2 of the sessions out of 6 might have been the best days of my life. And I remember thinking, if I died right now, it couldn't get any better than this. Like, life is perfect. And I remember right before one of those sessions, I said, like, nothing gets me off anymore. Nothing's exciting. Like, nothing rings my bell anymore. The only thing that used to really get me excited was the first few minutes of a big fire. And then I immediately had to take that back because I thought it's just really, and I've heard people try to describe psychedelics experience and they think I'm crazy, but it was, suffice to say, it was one of the best days, the most impactful days of my life where I realized that everything is just exactly the way it's supposed to be and everything's going to be okay. And everything's perfect. And so that's what ketamine did for me. And it has that effect for a lot of people. Not such a bad thing.
Those want to access ketamine in a healthy way.
Well, ketamine is also known. The first thing that comes to mind is a horse tranquilizer and a party drug. But ketamine is legal in all 50 states, and there are IV ketamine clinics everywhere. I think you could do a Google search and find a ketamine clinic close to you.
Are you required to have like a diagnosis of some sort, or referred by a doctor, or can anyone just walk into a clinic like this?
You need some sort of recommendation or a reason that you're doing it, at least where I did in Oregon, and that was for anxiety and depression. Or PTSD, which I think if any firefighters ever read the DSM-5, we could probably all fall into one of those. And if you haven't read the definitions of those in DSM-5, it'd probably be interesting for you to do so.
100%.
But I think most people probably get into ketamine IV therapy. They'd probably talk to a counselor before. They'd probably talk to their doctor about it. And it'd be a pretty easy recommendation.
Yeah, one of the early episodes of Beneath the Helmet, I talked to Rob Lethan, a Canadian firefighter, and his experience with ketamine was everything was dark and gray in his life. Didn't see any colors. And after his ketamine treatment, the whole world was bright, shiny, full of color. I was like, wow, what a change. And I think that was after the first treatment.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that's kind of how psychedelics work. We have ideas of how and why they work, but we don't really know why they work as well as they do for so many people, for so many different things, but they do.
So let's dive into SGB. So stellate ganglion block. Which is a mouthful.
Yes, it is. And I remember the first time I heard about this, I thought, no way, man. It was a book called Operator Syndrome, and I'd heard about it listening to podcasts. I think it was the Sean Ryan show, and they were talking about Operator Syndrome. And then I'd listened to a podcast with Dr. Froome, and got his book and read it, Operator Syndrome. And then come to find out, somebody kind of took an offshoot of Operator Syndrome, which is basically what vets are coming back with. And they kind of tweaked that a little bit to include firefighters. And the big difference between Operator Syndrome, and there's actually a paper written, if you look at his website, called Firefighter Syndrome. The big difference is that firefighters don't do a lot of breaching and explosion with guns, but the way they describe Operator Syndrome and Firefighter Syndrome, conditions and things that people experience a lot along the lines of signs and symptoms of PTSD, but that term PTSD never resonated with me. I thought it was bullshit. I didn't believe in it, but the way that he described the Operator Syndrome, Firefighter Syndrome really resonated with me. And he had a list of treatments that you can do on there, and one of them was called the Stellate ganglion block, where they put a needle into your neck, into bundle of nerve called the stellate ganglion, and put basically like a Novocaine in there that interrupts the signals from stellate ganglion nerves to your amygdala, which is your fight or flight. And I just thought, no way, I'm not getting a needle put in my neck. But as time went on, and I was in this community of people doing psychedelics and mental health and firefighters going to treatment, the Center for Excellence, the head person for the Center of Excellence is a female doctor, and she touts the stellate ganglion block as one of the best treatments we have. And when people go to the Center for Excellence, they ask who wants to get the shot. They put them in a van and they go and do it. I'm like, well, and then I knew somebody that had it done. Like, there's this thing, and definitely with me, it's like if I didn't know anybody that had done something that I could identify with, like it wasn't okay for me. But as soon as and that's what I was doing, looking for other firefighters that had done psychedelics. I was looking for permission, or I was looking to find like some community. Is it okay for me to do this? And then I found out that Center for Excellence was really touting this. I looked into it a little bit more, and I talked to a couple of people that had done it. And at the time that I did that, I was not sleeping at all. And like the definition of hypervigilance, I couldn't watch a motorcycle drive by me on the freeway without playing out what if he gets in a wreck? What if I'm the first one there? What if I was at the station? We got the tap out, and then we're riding to the hospital, and I'm going to tell his parents something. I'm like, that was every time a motorcycle passed me. I'm like, this is not normal, and I couldn't sleep. And so I decided to go do this thing and pay out of pocket for it. And it was like $2,000 for 2 shots. One day, 2 shots on one side, and another day, 10 days later, 2 shots on the other side. And it just turned down all the noise. Hypervigilance had been at like 11 forever. It was like I was turned down to 2 or 3, and I immediately started sleeping like 5 or 6 hours in a row. I hadn't done that for 15, 20 years. It was amazing. And yeah, super quick, pretty painless, and it worked really good.
From previous guests that have talked about SGB, they've also mentioned that it works for some people, and some people it's like 0 results on it. Have you heard that experience, or?
That's with any medication, that's with any kind of treatment. For me, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, it wears off. And then some people do go and back and get subsequent treatments. I've heard that it doesn't work for some people, and it really works well for some. It kind of works mediocre for others, and it's just like another tool. It's not the end all, like you're going to get this and be fixed, just like you're going to take psilocybin and be fixed. And for a while I felt odd or guilty, like, why am I doing all these different things? You know, like I'm doing psilocybin, doing ketamine, now I'm getting these injections in my neck, but they were all making me feel a little bit better. And I never got to the point where like I feel totally, I don't know what normal is, but I felt like I could be like, there's still room for improvement. Hit a plateau, you know, like I still got I still have room for improvement, you know. So I was like, well, it's probably not going to make things worse, but it might make things better. Like I kind of want to try it. And I'd kind of like to be able to talk about it. And this is kind of one of the first times I've ever talked about it, but I was curious to the point where I wanted to try it for myself and see, and it worked well for me.
So one new treatment that I know you're kind of passionate about is the Ibogaine. Want to dive into that a little bit and your experience with that?
Yeah. I heard about that watching the Sean Ryan show, and I love that show. These guys, these vets had these, they tell their whole life story, you know, some of them, a lot of them, like a lot of firefighters, had pretty challenging childhoods. They tell their whole life story. They talk about all their deployments and then how they'd come back and they had retired, you know, and they were really struggling, whether it was with drugs and alcohol or suicidal ideations. And they were all going to Mexico and doing Ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT, which are probably the 2 strongest psychedelics that there are. And I remember the first time I heard about it, I kind of felt the same way I did about the Stellate. Like, not for me. Like my trauma is little, their trauma is big. But then I kind of came to the realization of you kind of like, you compare traumas, you know? So like, is this Navy SEALs trauma bigger and brighter than 12-year-old girl had been sex trafficked for 6 years? I mean, you can't compare. They're both horrific traumas. And you can kind of, everybody's trauma that they have, or their anxiety or their depression or PTSD, it's their own. It's as bright and shiny as it gets. You know, one's not better than the other. I mean, it's a terrible, but people do that. I think firefighters and myself had a tendency to downplay, not that bad. I never needed to go to treatment. I don't have PTSD. But as I kind of kept doing more of this work and becoming open to other things and traveling around, and I'd heard about Mission Within, and I called up and talked to Jay Koppelman, the director, and I said, do you ever have firefighters go down, or is it all vets? Because I didn't want to be there with a bunch of Navy SEALs and Special Forces. I'd be the only firefighter and like not fit in. And he goes, no, we totally have vets and first responders. I go, but is it all vets and like one first responder? And I was just kind of feeling it out. And so I just took the step and I applied, and I talked with Dr. Martin Polanco, did a little intake to see if I was right for doing Ibogaine, and that went well. And I just decided, okay, I'd like to do this. And they had a scholarship, and I thought, well, there's no way I qualify for a scholarship. But he said, well, fill it out anyway. And as I'm filling it out, and they just thought, like they were talking about how much debt I had and what my mortgage was. And I said, I just retired, I spent a lot of money on psychedelics and healing. I got a scholarship, and I think it was around $7,000, and flew down to San Diego the night before. The next morning we met for breakfast. We all got in a van. There was 6 of us. They drove us across the border to a clinic in Tijuana, and I got 12-lead EKG, a blood draw, a cardiac ultrasound, and an interview with a doctor. Ibogaine has a way of potentially having some cardiac complications, so they want to screen out all the people that might have this cardiac condition that might be aggravated by Ibogaine. After 6 of us went through this clinic in Tijuana, it took about an hour and a half. There's no way that it would ever happen to the United States. It would have taken 4 days and several different appointments at places. We drove to the house that was maybe 20 minutes south of Tijuana, overlooking the ocean, and they'd been doing this there every weekend for maybe 3 or 4 years. So they had it down. The place you meet for breakfast, the clinic you go to, just everything was super well run and organized. Probably the most well run and organized retreat I've ever been a part of. And Michael and Katie were the facilitators. They were amazing. We got to the place, kind of got to know each other, talked about why we were there, what we were wanting to get out of it. We each took about an hour and talked with the therapist that was there. And as it kind of got dark, we all got an IV put in. We had another 12-lead check. We did a drug screen to make sure we didn't have any drugs in our system that, we weren't supposed to. We're pretty strict about, diet and weaning off certain medications and foods and things leading up to it, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week. And we're all kind of sitting in a circle. And the first night we're going to take Ibogaine, and it's just kind of like the Mount Everest of psychedelics that have somewhere between 12 and 30 hours it can last, which is a terrifying thought. That's my thought the first time I heard about it. And we all take 2 little white pills of Ibogaine, a doctor on scene, 2 nurses, and we all lay down on 6 beds, all in the same room, hooked up to a 12-lead IV. They gave us some magnesium kind of prophylactically for this possible cardiac thing. Had a heart monitor on, eye shades, and music. And we all kind of talked about intentions, and this is going to be, a really long, scary, challenging experience. And in all my work with psychedelics, I said, well, hold out for the possibility this might be really fun. And so for probably the first 2 hours, I just had a giant grin on my face, and it was pretty easy on me. And Ibogaine's very different from psilocybin. Psilocybin, if everybody's doing it in a room, there would be noise and people would be moving, but everybody was pretty quiet and pretty still. And they came around at a certain point and asked, if we were feeling it. They could tell if we were feeling it because they could watch the heart monitor change when the medicine was working. They asked if people wanted boosters, and so I think most of us did. Some people will have, they'll get sick and vomit, and I think 2 people did, one person more than the other. And somebody took the booster, and I hadn't really felt it very strong until then. Some people have very vivid visuals and experiences. With me, with psychedelics, I've never had bright visuals of things that I'm always jealous of people describing these fantastical visions and things that they see, but that's never been my experience. After the booster, I kind of definitely started to feel it get a little bit stronger, but I was never overwhelmed. If anything, I kind of felt a little twitchy, like I had some electrical jolts going through my body. And we were going to be there for 12 hours laying on the bed and no clocks. And so it was really disorienting, the time frame of it. Probably the one thing I could describe, probably at the peak of it, I felt like I could see with my blindfold on. and my eyes closed, and I sat up, and it'd probably be interesting to watch because I was kind of looking around the room, and the only way I could describe it is like my mind knew where everyone and everything was in the room, and I could see with my eyes closed. I put my hand in front of my eyes, like, oh, this is too much. But I laid back down, and I just was kind of uncomfortable, like I was in a really long fight for the rest of the time, but thought about all of the intentions that I had written down and talked about and journaled for the past couple months. I wasn't sure if there was any calls in my career that bothered me, and I tried to think about all of them and kind of acknowledge them and put them aside. 12 hours is a long time. You can think about a lot of things. So that just kind of went on until I saw daylight coming from underneath the curtain. I'm like, oh, thank God. Michael Punky finally kind of came into the room. He goes, you want to get up and go downstairs? I said, yes. So that was about 12 hours.
Wow.
I get down to this. The food was amazing. Like, there was people cooking nonstop the whole time. It was a really good, clean, whole food. I was sitting there having some tea, and I just felt like the front of my forehead and my brain, like I'd never felt it before, was just kind of tingly in a way, not unpleasant, not just, I was aware of it, and it was tingling. A lot of people had the same experience, and it was just, my brain was just calm and quiet. There wasn't a million thoughts. I wasn't racing. I wasn't thinking about anything. I was just really quiet and calm. And that was kind of everybody's takeaway. And eventually people would come out. Some people stay up there until afternoon. Like, that second day is really quiet day. They call it the gray day, where people don't do much. Was offered like a IV of kind of hydration stuff, and took that. And we all just kind of sat around and talked, and people told stories when they were ready to about what they experienced or felt or saw. And it was really, it was a pretty amazing experience. It was not the scary Ibogaine 12-hour that I had in my head. It was pretty easy. And it wasn't too hard on anybody that was there. It was just, there was so much support. It felt so safe. And so that was the Ibogaine experience. One of the guys hadn't tasted or smelled anything since 2011. I think the day after, got his sense of taste and smell back.
All right.
And everybody just had huge shifts in just not being so, just having their mind calm for maybe the first time in their life, where they're just not racing thoughts from one thing to the other, not looking past whatever you're doing now, thinking about the next thing, but actually just kind of being, I hate to think, be present. Everybody just seemed to be really present. So that was kind of the Ibogaine experience. And then the next thing was everybody did 5-MeO DMT, which is, this gets a little weird, but hang in there with me. 5-MeO DMT is a secretion from the Sonoran desert toad, and you smoke it in a pipe. It is probably one of the strongest, fastest acting hallucinogens there is. Next to Ibogaine, which is the longest acting. And they found that putting these two together worked synergistically, and they work together and produce really good results. Where I heard a couple of people describe it as, Ibogaine does all the heavy lifting and moves the rocks out of the way, and then 5-MeO DMT kind of polishes everything out. And I always like to go first. If there is a size up or a test that I always wanted to be first. Like, I wanted to go first, so I went first. And it's a special little room down there, and there was a big guy on either side of me, and there was a couple other people in the room watching, and a nurse. And we talked a lot about how you will smoke this out of the pipe, and it seems odd. It seems like you're smoking toad venom, which you are, but I just kept thinking to myself, there's a lot of other people that have done this before me, and then the science is there and the stories are there, to just trust in this and the process and these people, and that you're going to do this drug and it's going to work and it's going to make things better. And that was kind of the mantra I had going in. And I was just curious, because at this point, I'd kind of done all the psychedelics that I was interested or curious about. And this was kind of like this is the Mount Everest of things that I'd done.
Yeah.
And to say that I was nervous or anxious would be an understatement. And and you could do it up to 4 or 5 times. And then the first time they do it, it was kind of like a handshake dose just to let you see what it felt like. And so I took it. They lay you back on a mattress so you don't hurt yourself. And there's somebody on either side of you. Some people will get up, move around, or they just don't know. So there's 2 big guys that kind of control you. And I felt it. It was pretty uncomfortable. It kind of felt just had like a whole lifetime of emotion kind of surging through me, and I could see what it felt like, and I could start to understand what they were saying about how it works and what it feels like. And I'm like, well, got to see some visuals and just have these intense emotions. And I'm like, okay, I'd like to do it again. And I remember them saying, do it as many times as you need to until you get the work done or do what you need to get done. And I didn't know what that meant and then the second time I did it, and I think it was a little bit more, I really saw like a really bright yellow, red and orange light that was bigger than me. And I imagined it was exactly what heaven, or when you died, like the perfect place where there was no pain, no worry, no anxiety. There was not, it was just perfect. But it wasn't quite there. And so now I understood, oh, do it as many times as you need to until you get the work done that you need to get done. And so I'm like, I was down there for an hour and a half, but it felt like 15. Like, okay, I'll do it again for the third time. And I had the third time, and I think maybe I should have stopped at the second time, because I said, you might want to stop. You might not like what goes, but I was kind of bound and determined to not leave anything on the table and have as big experience as I could. I didn't want to not have the full experience. I was kind of bound and determined to do it until they told me to stop going in. And the second time, I had a recurring experience that I'd had on ketamine when I was transported by ambulance. I had a near-death experience, and I found myself thinking that I was in a hospital room in ICU, and that I was in a coma, and I was trying to come out of a coma, and I could see my wife's face, and she was smiling, waiting for me to wake up. And I knew that I had this thought that I hadn't been a firefighter. I'd actually been like a produce guy at a grocery store, and I'd gotten hit by the head, and that all of this, the fire department, everything, all the bad things in my life had all just been a dream, and I was just waiting to come out of this coma. And then it kind of wore off, and it was like, okay, I'm going to do it one more time. And I did it one more time, and I think I'd kind of come to terms with all of the dark, scary things in my life that I needed to come to terms with, except for one thing, and it came up then, and it was around suicide. And I'd lost several friends to suicide when I was pretty young in the fire department. I'd seen a lot of suicides at work. I was worried about some of my friends, and I had been worried, for a long time, like if I kept doing this job, it might happen to me, or it happens to a lot of guys when they retire. And I had a pretty extreme, it was a pretty dark experience around suicide. And I had some outbursts, kind of some yelling and screaming, which happens when people are doing it. They would keep the whole house separated from one another with some music on. And I think everybody after me, I heard let loose a scream or yell down there. And it was kind of like the final thing that I had needed to deal with, that I had not wanted to face. And it felt really good. I sat up. They gave me a big bowl of fruit. And I sat there, and Michael, Punky, and I walked outside and kind of sat on the patio and talked a little bit. And it kind of took a little while to still processing what went on there, or what that meant, or what it means to me, or what I got out of it still. I'm still talking about it in therapy, but personal therapist. But can't imagine having not had that experience at this point. It was amazing and enlightening, and I wish I did done it sooner. Maybe I wasn't ready. I think maybe having that experience with no prior psychedelic experience might be better than somebody that has read about it a lot, knew about it. But that was an amazing experience, and probably the best run, most professional retreat I've ever seen. Part of the people were amazing. The mission within was an amazing organ.
And this is only like a month ago from the day we're recording this, right?
Yeah, it seems like 6 months ago.
Wow.
And did it change me? Do I feel different today than when I went? Yeah. I think my wife would say so too. I still, it wasn't, it also isn't a one-time thing that's going to cure you. It's, how do you integrate this into your life and take hold of these things that you learn and integrate them into your life? Meditating more, eating better, exercising more, not drinking coffee. Like, I don't know, drink so much coffee, but part of that process of cleaning up the diet was kind of avoiding some of those. So it's been a huge, huge difference. And I see so much promise in that. Like the guy getting his taste and smell back. I think that it's such an interesting compound. And I remember hearing a doctor from Columbia talk about Ibogaine, and he said it's the most interesting compound I've ever come across in my entire life, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life studying it because of the potential effects. And I think that's why Texas passed a $50 million Ibogaine initiative. And I don't think they really know, and they won't know for a long time, all the other side things that it might work on. It's just an amazing, naturally occurring, it's a shrub from Africa, Gabon, Africa, and it's an amazing, intelligent medicine. I got a whole group of new friends from that experience when I went down there with. There was another firefighter there from San Francisco that I was able to talk firefighter stuff with and feel comfortable, and that was amazing. These are all just tools that you can use, and it is okay for firefighters to do this. There's been somebody that's done it before you, and it might be really helpful. It's not for everybody. Just try something different.
Yep. Experiment.
And they were really big on mindfulness, meditation, gratitude practice. Like, those are the things I'm leaning on now after the fact. And I didn't meditate before then. I tried. I just struggled.
Yeah, your mind's probably a little bit more calm and at ease, allowing you to get into that state a little easier, right?
It's still quiet. I got pretty anxious leading up to this, but this was pretty easy.
Oh, that's life, right? Yeah, it's life. So as we kind of close, I would love to hear what you learned about yourself through this whole experience, maybe the last even 5-10 years of going through this psilocybin psychedelic experience. What do you know now about yourself you did not know before?
How important it is to be around people and talk, and actually talk about real things. Vulnerable and talk about the thing that you don't think you should talk. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, if you're feeling like shit and you're isolating and drinking and you think you're the only one feeling the way you're feeling, that is not good. And you're not sleeping, that's not good. Be around people. Humans are social creatures. We're meant to be around people, and we're meant to talk. And like, if you don't feel like you have anybody to tell everything to, find one person that you can talk to, that you can tell anything and talk about anything and everything with. That is, it's okay to be different. It's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to talk about what you want to talk about. Don't censor yourself. Don't worry about being cold from the herd or being, left out. Be who you want to be and talk about the things you want to talk about. You will attract people that are similar, and people that don't like it, you don't need them in your life.
So in closing, is there any questions that I did not ask you that you wish I asked you?
I think we covered a lot of stuff. If people are curious about this, get on YouTube and put your question in there, or you want to learn about Ibogaine or psilocybin. Be careful to trust, but there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of books out there. I'm pretty easy to find. If you're curious, you can reach out to me. I'll be working at a retreat in Oregon, a legal service center, and we'll be doing group work with firefighters. The first retreat will be in February at Podyssey. Don't get stuck thinking that it's bad. It's a drug. It's a medicine. Every bottle that you get from the doctor is a drug. This is a root, Ibogaine, or a mushroom. This is a plant. This isn't engineered by somebody, big pharma, to keep you on it for life. In reality, you only take this weed a few times. So don't get hung up in the stigma that this is bad. You know, maybe in the future, in 10 years from now, this might be more the norm.
Yeah, beautiful. How can people get a hold of you if they want to, know more about either the retreats that you're involved in or just even chat with you?
LinkedIn, Matt Thierfelder.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and sharing your wisdom and your whole journey through psilocybin, psychedelics, and now the strong and important work you're doing to support others to be exposed to this. I think is amazing. So thanks for being brave. Thanks for being vulnerable. Thanks for being you. Thanks for being Matt. And yeah, I appreciate you sharing the story with everyone today.
Yeah, thanks, Chief.
You betcha. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this great episode with Matt and sharing his experience going through psilocybin and his exposure to it and the pinnacle exposure that he had in Mexico. If you're curious about this, like Matt said, check it out online, read up on it, grab some books, reach out to Matt, and see if this is the right fit for you. All right, everyone, enjoy season 4. Happy 2026. All the best. Stay well. All right, that's all right.
Until then, stay well. Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.